Good afternoon. I'm Karen DuBois-Walton, the President and CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Thank you for joining us for today's community briefing on civic health. Today is the first in a series of sessions we're hosting to explore the health of our civic life and the role that each one of us can play in strengthening it. Before we begin, just a few quick notes. We are in webinar mode. That means that you can see and hear us, but we cannot see and hear you. But we do want this to be engaging. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature to post any questions you might have for our panelists today. We will do our best to get to as many of them as we can. This session is being recorded and will be sent out to attendees following the session. We will include with that answers to some of the questions, including some we may not get to live. So let's get started. Oh, and if you have any technical issues, please feel free to use the chat to communicate with us. So let's get started. I'm really happy to see so many of you join us for what is such an important conversation.
Hi, Carmen.
At the at the foundation, we believe that a thriving community is built on connection, on trust, on shared responsibility, on voices that feel heard, and on institutions and residents working shoulder to solve problems. That set of relationships is what we mean when we talk about civic health. And our civic health has become an essential priority in our strategic framework. As many of you know, the foundation has been focused on strengthening community voice, deepening belonging, building trust, and expanding opportunities for residents to shape solutions. Civic health can't be a standalone project. It has to be woven deeply into how we understand community well-being. We've included civic health as a strategic pillar. We've embarked on unique civic leagues where civic learning, civic engagement, relationship, and shared power come together. We're investing in organizing, grassroots, and community problem solving, and you will hear threads of that framework throughout today's conversation. But this session is the first in a multi-part briefing session, and our goal is simple. Today, we want to define civic health, we want to understand why it matters, and we want to introduce some of the leading voices who are shaping the national and state conversation around this. Our future briefings will delve into what's happening at the local level and spotlight local leaders and local initiatives at the neighborhood level, resident level, some youth-driven initiatives, and more that's building civic health in Greater New Haven. So, to ground us, let's introduce the three phenomenal leaders who each bring a unique lens to civic health and who are joining us from across the country and our state today in the philanthropic sector. Excited to have with us Shannon Green from Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, Matt Leininger from the National Civic League, and Sally Whipple from Connecticut's Old State House and the Connecticut Democracy Center. Welcome to each of you. I'm going to begin by, again, civic health is one of those terms that's thrown around and probably has as many different meanings as there are listeners and speakers to the term. So for our time together, I want us to have some shared understanding. So I'm going to invite you each in to first introduce yourselves and your organization, and then a bit about how do you think about civic health. Shannon, let's go ahead and start with you.
Great. Well, first of all, I'm so glad to be here and just really grateful that you all are centering civic health in the work that you do. As Karen said, I'm Shannon Green. I lead Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, or PACE, and we are a community of funders from all over the country representing different ideological perspectives, working on different parts of the democracy and civic engagement ecosystem, but all with this shared commitment to strengthening and renewing democracy through active civic participation. So it's very much in our DNA, this belief that human beings, citizens of this country, and people working together at the community level are going to be the ones who really drive the kind of civic renewal that we need. So this concept of civic health is very much part and parcel of the work that we do. We define civic health as the level of community participation trust and connection in a community. And there are a couple of elements for us that are really important to civic health. One, a civically healthy community has high civic engagement rates. So that's in political and social life. So it could be anywhere from voting and engaging in advocacy to volunteering and joining community associations. Secondly, that there is strong civic infrastructure, or we like to think about this as spaces where people can get together and interact with one another and solve problems and just form social bonds. Three, reliable information. So PACE has this core belief that for people to be able to engage fully and freely in civic life, they need to have access to credible and accurate information, and that information helps them engaged in decision-making processes, fosters trust in institutions, and really helps encourage that active civic engagement. And then the fourth piece is the ability to build trust and bridge differences. So the idea that a civically healthy community is a place where people can really work across differences respectfully and in ways that help advance common or shared objectives. And finally, the last thing that I'll say is we believe that civic health is so important because it is then the foundation of not only healthy communities, but a thriving democracy more generally.
Thank you, Shannon. We're going to pick up a bunch of those threads as we move through our time together. But Matt, let me let you come in, introduce yourself, your organization, and how you think about or define civic health.
Thank you, Karen. I'm very happy to be here with old and new friends. And I'm actually used to work in Connecticut many, many years ago. So happy to kind of be returning virtually anyway. I'm Matt Leininger. I'm the vice president of the National Civic League. The Civic League has this very interesting history. It was founded at a time when democracy was in trouble, when civic health was low, trust was low, polarization was high. It was founded in 1894 by Teddy Roosevelt and Louis Brandeis and a number of other civic reformers of the day. And it was then involved in that whole era of civic reform, which affected the local governments and the part of community foundations were born during that time period. All kinds of pieces of our civic infrastructure kind of come out of that era, and the league was part of that whole experience. And then I think what we kind of feel like now is that we're facing the same sort of question today, same sort of challenge. Democracy is again in trouble. Civic health again is not as high as we want it to be in so many places. And so, what do we do to kind of take innovations in participation and democracy and plug them into our systems? So some of the things that the league does, some of them are things that we've been doing for a long time. So we've been maintaining the model city charter since 1902. The latest edition came out in 2021. So we update it every so often. We've been running the All-America City Award since 1949. And if you ever want to have an uplifting look at what democracy can really be and how civic health can really thrive, join us in Denver at the end of June. It's a terrific event that really kind of restores your confidence in a lot of the things that kind of work. And then we do newer things. We've been doing since 2025 the Healthy Democracy Map, which is our attempt to catalog all the things, all the different organizations in America that are doing something to strengthen democracy with the service and volunteerism or civic education or civic media, engaging people in decision making, all sorts of things. There's 14 different categories and about 12,000 organizations mapped so far. If you don't see your organization listed, please add it. There's a whole button you can click to give more information about your group, or you can tell us about other groups that we may not know about that should be on the map. So that's the basics about the league. Do you want to start, Karen, with talking about civic health? Or we kind of going to move into that in a second?
Yeah, I'd love it, Matt, if you give
Sure.
us
Okay.
a bit of how you think about it, and is
Yeah.
it similar to Shannon's? Is there anything you'd add to what Shannon
So I
lifted
think
up?
it's similar, absolutely. And I think basically we think of it as how are people in a community involved with each other in decision making, problem solving, and community building. That those three things are all important. They're interwoven, and they should be strategic and planned. And that if people are involved in those different things, and if the people involved in them are truly diverse and representative of the community, that is a stronger community. And we can tell, one, It has impact on all kinds of social indicators, the extent to which people are connected with one another in strong social networks. That affects their physical health, it affects their economic prospects, how well their kids do in school, how well the community can deal with a natural disaster or some sort of crisis. All of those things we know from lots of social science research are heavily dependent on people's connections with one another. To the extent to which people are involved in decision making and policy making has a big impact on whether those policy decisions are representative, equitable, well supported by the community, and successfully implemented. And finally, if you can engage large numbers of people across their differences in solving public problems of various kinds, whether that's a problem in your neighborhood or in the community as a whole, you're tapping into all kinds of capacities that people have to actually do things to improve their communities.
Thank
Stop
you.
there.
No, that this is perfect because you're setting the frame for why we should care about this. Sally, you're right here with us in Connecticut. Before I leave, Matt, I just have to, as I'm sitting here in New Haven, lift up the city of New Haven and other towns in our region are proud to have been all America cities over the years. So I have to say that while I'm with the National Civic League vice president
Absolutely.
here. But Sally, I want to pull you in. You're a little closer to home right here. Tell us more, introduce yourself. Tell us more about the work that you're doing and your definition of civic health.
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today talking about civic health. My name is Sally Whipple. I work for the Connecticut Democracy Center, and our organization is a nonprofit, and we work in partnership with the General Assembly to manage Connecticut's Old State House and the Connecticut Network. And I am responsible for the Old State House, which is a historic state capitol and a museum today. But we really think of the Old State House as the place where history and civics meet. And we believe that you can't understand the world without history, and you can't change it without civics. And the building has incredible stories about people from Connecticut who really affected change. And so we tell their stories and we use them as models of really effective civic behavior and civic health. So for example, we tell the story of Prudence Crandall and her students, first school for Black women in Connecticut, and we tell the story of the Amistad men and children who were tried in our building. The first trials occurred here. So we have a lot of opportunity to talk about things from the past and how people were involved in civic life in the past. But of course, the past doesn't matter if you're not using it to shape the future and to understand the present. So we also have a number of other programs. One of them is called Connecticut's Kid Governor, which is now done in 4 other states. And in that program, 5th graders learn how to sort of do democracy. They come up with an issue they care about. They research it. They write a platform to address it. They run for governor, and they may end up as the governor or one of the members of the governor's cabinet. And then they spend a full year actually keeping their campaign promises and making their platforms work to improve their communities. And another program that we do that really engages students in civic work is Connecticut History Day. That's another student choice, student voice program where students pick issues from the past that they would like to explore and understand. They present it in a variety of different ways. And through that program, they really come to understand the world better. And they come to understand how people in the past affected change. And they can see when a community was civically healthy and when it was not healthy. So it really exposes young people to thinking about how communities function and how civic life works. And we think about this as part of our mission, which is really to create or provide a generational path to civic life, to civic health. And that is very important to us. We do adult programming as well, but we feel that if we can really help students understand at a very young age what this is all about and that their voices matter and that they have agency, that is one of the most important things that we can do. When we think about civic health, I love all of the things that Matt and Shannon said, of course. They are the real experts in civic health. I would also add to that a sense of civic attachment And in our world, we think about that as if you love the place where you live, you will want to make it better. You will want to be involved. So in order to love the place that you live, we would argue that you should know its history. You should know how it got to be what it is. And you also need to know other people. You need to know your neighbors. You need to talk to your family at night. You need to do all of these little tiny things that really aren't so tiny at all, because they're teaching you how to engage with the world. And to me, civic health is about having communities and people who really engage with the world, who love where they live and want to make other people love where they live. So they want to make it better.
Sally, thank you. I don't think you could have given a more beautiful tie-in to why this matters to community foundations, who are explicitly place-based and have community in the name. So thank you for that connection too. So as we think about this conversation around civic health, and we're thinking about this sense of civic attachment, and we're thinking about how we're engaging more and more people in the decision making and the problem solving and in the community building. I love that the why we should care about this was lifted up. That there are real indicators about how one's health and economics and school achievement, right, all connect to this, and how we make better decisions when more voices are involved. So with all of that, the question becomes, well, how do we measure? So how do we know the state of civic health? So I want to turn. Maybe I'll start with Matt on this one, but how do we think about measurement of civic health, and what are we learning? What is the data telling us right now? The default would be that we're in trouble with the sense of civic connectedness, but what is that? What the data says? What are you learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and of course it varies place to place, state to state. The short answer to your question of how do we measure is lots of ways, probably not enough. And in particular, we've got kind of a gap in how we measure between kind of big bird's eye picture things like the Civic Health Index. Civic Health Index, which is done usually at a state level, usually with the cooperation of the National Conference on Citizenship. That data is that information is based on census data. So the census asks every 10 years, or every so often asks people, do you go to public meetings? Do you know your neighbors? Some of those kind of very basic sorts of questions. So CHI, or Civic Health Index data, is helpful to kind of show you kind of the bird's eye view. It doesn't show you how you improve your scores. And then at the other end of the measurement level, we have kind of project evaluations. Everyone gets a grant. It does something with local government. You've got to do an evaluation. It's usually some surveys, and it's usually maybe some interviews. And you're saying, how did this particular thing that I did, how did the people who were involved, how did they think about it? In between, we have a whole lot of nothing. Most communities are not gauging how people are thinking, and what you were just saying about attitudes about each other. That data is not being collected in most places. Now, I'm going to put in the chat a little bit a link to a report which lists a whole lot of things that are out there, lots of different kinds of instruments, rubrics, surveys that have been developed by academics or by other researchers to measure some of those sorts of things. So there's a lot of things that exist. They're not generally being used to the extent that we need. One thing that we've done at the Civic League, we have a civic engagement scorecard, which we use, which is just a little use your phone, 60 seconds, 90 seconds sort of thing. It asks people to rate their public meetings, that's a type of work that the Civic League does. We try to work with local governments and school systems to change their public meetings from the kind of 2 minutes on a microphone frustrating scenario to something better. And so we use this little tool to measure people's kind of attitudes to what they just experienced. We also use it to measure people's attitudes about civic health. Do you feel connected to others? Do you feel informed? Do you feel like you have a meaningful say in the things that you care about? Do you feel that your volunteerism is supported and honored? So that sort of attitudinal data, and it's not, using a tool like that is not hard. And you don't necessarily need to use it in a kind of representative sample sorts of way. If you could do that, that's great. It's a lot more effort, usually a lot more expense. But even just kind of using a tool like that with the people who are participating in the things that you are doing, because their opinions matter. And the more you get involved, people, the better. But just understanding how people think about their local community, their local democracy, that gives you some important data on things that you can change. And whenever you ask people to measure something, that carries with it the idea that this thing can be improved. So measurement itself is, in some ways, it's a form of engagement, which gets people thinking about how can I make my community better.
Thanks, Matt. Here in our state, and we're proud in our region to benefit from Data Haven's
Oh,
ongoing
cool.
community well-being surveys, which gives us a great tool to track people things like trust in community, trust in institution, trust among neighbors, and helping to get at that. But you're lifting up such an important point that that this is so key to the success of our communities, and yet so in too many places under evaluated, under measured.
Right.
Shannon, let me ask you the same question about how it's assessed, but also what are we learning? What are you learning from the data about the state of our community connections?
Great. Well, it's always challenging to go after Matt, since he has such a command of this topic and the measurements. But let me just sort of add to what he was saying. So, in the middle, you do have a bunch of measures of specific aspects of civic health. So, there are measures of social capital and trust. There are measures of social connection. There are measures of institutional trust. There are measures of effective polarization. There are measures of the density of opportunities for people to engage civically. And I think it would not be surprising to most people on this call that most of those measures are pointing to some real challenges, if not a crisis. So a lot of the measures, especially when it comes to trust, have been declining precipitously over the past couple of decades. There are some indications that it's leveling off, which may be a result of like having hit a floor, or it may be a result of people just paying a lot more attention to this. And I think a lot more visibility that has been brought to this topic, including through the sort of bowling alone phenomenon and the fact that the former Surgeon General really, centered this idea of isolation as being a real problem when it comes to people's, physical health and mental health. So maybe more awareness is contributing to that. But I think, it's fair to say that in too many communities throughout the US, civic health is not where we would want it to be. And there are increasing efforts to reverse that I hope will start to pay off. But the indicators, unfortunately, are moving in the wrong direction and have been for some time. The only other thing that I'll say, and I really like, I want to attach it to what Sally said, there are all these kind of institutional measures of civic health. At the end of the day, it really matters how people feel, right? So we're talking about these things, at a community level or even more broadly at a state level. But when we think about civic health, it's also about how somebody experiences being a part of a community, right? So I loved what Sally was saying just in terms of, people in those communities really having a sense of voice, that their voice matters, that people are listening, that they have choice, right? That they are able to contribute to decisions that affect their lives very directly, that they have power or agency is something that we're talking a lot about, that they're literally able to shape the things that are affecting them so directly, and that they have a real sense of efficacy, that they can be involved in those things in a way that matters. And finally, belonging, right? Like we keep seeing and hearing how important it is that people feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And so for all of these measures that can come across as very academic, I do want to kind of come back to the way that people feel and the way they're experiencing civic life is paramount.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I want to so I don't want to leave us in this place of crisis. But we're so clear that that is what's driving, the reason we've made this a strategic framework, the reason that folks across the country are thinking about this is that we know we cannot continue a downward trend. We cannot sustain where we are. We need to get to a space where we are building greater connections for all of the reasons you've called out. And so I think we understand why it matters, what it is and why it matters. And so I really want to pull now, Sally, I'm going to start with you on this next one, because there are things that are happening all across our country, here in our great state and here in Greater New Haven, that are effectively bringing people together and countering that sense of loneliness, the bowling alone, the partisanship, the negative engagement that happens on social media. There are things that are countering that. So I really want to spend the bulk of the time we have getting into those kinds of initiatives. So, Sally, you've already begun to lift up some of the great work that happens through the Democracy Center and at the old State House. But I want to give you a chance to expound on a bit more about, what are you finding useful in building the sense of connection to place, to community, and helping to build civic health.
Great. Well, I'll say that when Connecticut did its first two Civic Health Index reports in 2011 and 2016, we were involved in that. And I really am a history person, a museum person. Civics was something I did but didn't know about. So I've been learning about it. And those two studies really helped us figure out directions that we wanted to go in because we could see gaps and we could understand what civic health meant and started to think about how to build relationships. So we, for Connecticut History Day, it had always been a contest that kids could compete in doing History Day projects, but we decided to turn that into a community. And so we've worked for a very long time, not just to have the kids do projects, but also to bring in volunteer judges from across the state, and we'll be doing this in New Haven this weekend, who can talk to the students and learn about their projects and give them pointers and help them. It brings the parents in, and then museums come to the History Day contests and they show what they do and they interact with the kids. And the kids, when they're doing their projects, are encouraged to go out and interview people who know something about their topics. So we have really tried to build a community of support around these students. And I think that's been very effective. We're selling more History Day t-shirts because people really like that affiliation with History Day. So it's something that's teaching civic skills and important skills, but it's also creating a sense of community. In thinking about this talk today, I looked a lot at the 6 Points of Connection document that was sent out to us to look at. And I'm thinking that where we have been missing the boat and we get caught up in daily life is we're not being as intentional as we should be for sort of a phase 2 of building community and taking what we have done and seeing how we can really firm up communities of play, identity, all of those things that are talked about in that report. And, I'm also thinking about our farmers market. We have a vibrant farmers market that we did through COVID. We have never let up. That market started in 1643 and we've kept it going. And we have music, we have farmers, we have vendors, we have people who come and talk to each other and have gotten to know each other over the years because they see each other twice a week at the farmers market. But we have to go further than that. We have to do something that really connects people and helps them engage at a deeper level in the farmers market. So I'm thinking about how do we actively try to deepen the relationships of people who come to the edges of our community or people who come into a community, but we're just not going far enough. I hope that makes sense to you. It's just something I've started to think about. And so I think the thing I would say is any of us who are interested in building civic health in whatever way we can, we've got to be intentional and very serious about that intentionality and plan with people, not for people. And really pay attention to all of the great information that Matt and Shannon and their organizations are providing for us.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let's hear from Matt next on that question of what is working, what should we be leaning, in what ways should we be leaning in, and what are you seeing?
Absolutely. And Sally, you're right. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which community foundations, other kinds of local institutions are doing these great things to strengthen civic health. I put in the chat a link to the the guide we did for the state of Rhode Island, which is a Rhode Island Civic Health Action Guide, which includes a whole bunch of different sorts of things, arts and cultural things, youth things, media, direct engagement and decision making and problem solving, all these sorts of things. And kind of taking stock of that is important. Most groups and most places lack, as you said, kind of a proactive, concerted plan. People are doing things and they're good things, but is there a kind of a cross-sector plan that these different institutions and organizations are all bought into that kind of links these things to one another, and kind of helps them kind of figure out how to make them all better? That's the kind of the next step for lots of places, is that kind of planning, and to do it in this kind of cross-sector sort of way. There's an initiative called Community Foundations for Civic Health, which is a collaboration between the National Civic League, CF Leads, which is the national network of community foundations, and the Rhode Island Foundation, to do that and to support community foundations across the country doing more of that kind of stuff. And that is that we're going to be producing and sharing more and more materials, including PACE research on civic language and all kinds of things as part of that effort. But that kind of cross-sector planning is important. And one thing that you can do is to kind of blend some of the types of opportunities you're talking about, right? Okay, lots of things. People, the largest, most diverse array of people are going to come for community building events. The farmers market. That's the food. I can bring my kids. You're not necessarily going to go to City Hall to a public meeting. That's fine. But you come to the farmers market. Well, you can do things that relate people to what's happening at City Hall at the farmers market. Use technology. Give them a survey that you can do on their phone while they're walking around. Have a little booth that tells them about the budget meeting next month. There's all kinds of cool ways you can kind of blend these different impulses and incentives people have. Just to give you one more fun example, the city of Decatur, Georgia, has a Touch the Budget event where every year they bring their fire trucks and their police cars and their street sweepers to like town square, and all these young families come, and the kids, get their pictures taken driving the fire, well, not driving, but sitting behind the wheel of the fire truck. And then there's a chart that shows, here's how much this fire truck cost. And here's our 3 different options for the budget next year. Fill out our survey or talk to the staff, so you've got like a reason for people to come that's all about community and kids and fun things, but you're giving them information and getting input back from them about some sort of public issue without them having to go to the meeting at City Hall. So that any ways you can blend those sorts of things, you're really kind of finding new ways to strengthen civic health.
I love those examples, Matt, of meeting people, where they are in places that they feel comfortable, and thinking about how to use those as a springboard to building more and more connection. And you lifted up the work that Shannon is leading in PACE around language, because one thing that has been so clear is that it has become difficult for people to talk to each other in ways that build community, because there appear to be so many fault lines of things that as soon as this is said, we see camps form, people flow into their camp, and it is dividing rather than creating those spaces for us to actually talk across difference, something we really want to promote here at the Community Foundation. So Shannon, we're very interested in the work you've been with, the learnings from the work that you've been doing. So I'd love for you to come into this question as well about, what are you seeing that works, but particularly also to help us understand what you're learning about language, and how we can talk about this in effective ways that bring people in rather than alienate or divide.
Absolutely. Before I get to that, I just want to, I think, sound the same note of optimism that Sally and Matt are, in the sense that, like, what we're seeing is really a period of a lot of innovation and experimentation when it comes to civic renewal or civic health. And it's really exciting. And I think, since my world is philanthropy and kind of funder world, what I see is this real recognition that, as important as it is to be focused on democracy at a national level, at the end of the day, if we really want to see transformative change and we want to renew democracy, we have to do so from the bottom up. So there's been a real sea change in philanthropy over the past couple of years, and I think it's accelerated in the past year and a half, where a lot of funders are going local, or recognizing the importance of investing in communities. So I just wanted to lift up a couple of those examples because it's very encouraging to me. Matt mentioned the fact that a lot of community foundations are getting into this work, as evidenced by this call. We're also seeing a lot of funders invest in community level problem solving where people who are from different kinds of backgrounds, maybe have different viewpoints, are getting together to address really tangible problems within their communities. So it might be substance abuse problems or homelessness or trying to figure out what to do with dilapidated buildings, and how to revitalize them so they can be used by communities. And that's happening through the Trust for Civic Life, the Shift Action Lab, and other civic hubs that are being established throughout the US. So I take a lot of inspiration and courage from that. We're also seeing a lot of experimentation and innovation when it comes to how do people feed in to decision-making processes. So you're seeing this real surge of civic assemblies. So these opportunities from, for people who have never been involved in, politics or have never really been engaged civically, coming into these processes and really being able to shape recommendations for public officials to take up and to put into practice. And then finally, we're seeing some really cool innovation when it comes to civic education. So lots of experimentation with in-school learning, but also out-of-school opportunities to get people more informed about the opportunities for them to engage and also to connect them with those opportunities in practice. So there's so much going on, and like for all of the negativity as we were talking about with the declining indicators, I really do feel like we're on the precipice of this period of civic renaissance. So language is going to be really important in this context because, as you said, Karen, language in the polarized environment that we live in today has the ability to push people away because it's laden with all of this meaning that maybe you don't necessarily even recognize, but also has the potential to pull people in and to engage people across differences and to hold them in dialogue. So, the work that PACE has been doing on civic language perceptions over many, many years has been really just pointing to this very fact that it is possible to use language in ways that build bridges, that bring people together, and that hold them in conversation and dialogue. But we have to be really intentional about the choices that we make when we're using language. And so there is a report called How to Talk Bridgie that really summarizes all of that research and data and really, indicates what words are, are perceived positively by Americans across the board. What words do people feel like are for them? So this is not a word for someone else. This word belongs to me. And what words bring people together? We call those bridgy word. So there's bridginess strength. It will be encouraging for you to all know that for all of the years we've been doing this research, community has scored the highest as the bridgiest word. So it's a word that we can all lean on if we're trying to work across differences. And this year it was only followed by freedom. So there are these bridgy words. The guide also helps people understand what signals other words are sending. So if you want to try to reach across some of these divides, and I'm not just talking about political, I'm talking about gender, educational, rural, urban, and other kinds of differences, you can actually choose words really intentionally to signal to somebody that you want to be in conversation with them. So it's all in the guide. And I guess the last thing that I would say that, again, I find really encouraging is in the research we did in November, which is in the How to Talk Bridgie 2.0 guide that just came out. Positivity for these civic terms is actually increasing and increasing quite significantly since we first started studying these words many, many years ago. So again, I take a lot of inspiration from that because I think that people are now in the conversation, and in many ways, the crisis that we're facing is creating this opportunity for renewal.
I obviously love that community scores number one. if there's ever a thought of rebranding, we will always keep community in the name. But no, that's so powerful as we dig into what is dividing us and powerfully what can pull us together and the power of language in that. I appreciate that the guide has been dropped in the chat. And I encourage you all, these written materials will also be sent out, but I encourage you all to take a look at that as we strengthen our ability to be in community together, and in communities of difference. I also want to lift up some work here at the Community Foundation, led by the work of Cynthia Farrar in our community, who brought to us this model of civic leagues, which is a way of intentionally designing the activities that we hold, the events that we hold, to pull in people from different parts of our community, from different backgrounds in an intentional way, so that we create spaces for folks who may not have had an opportunity to ever cross paths or meet or sit together, to be in spaces with trusted data, trusted information, which was something brought up earlier, putting information in front of people, and being able to understand that information together, to debate it, to question it, to learn together as a part of problem solving and coming together to some solutions. I think is a very powerful tool that resonates with some of what you've been doing and something the Community Foundation will continue to lean in on. So Sally, how does that resonate with you around language and creating the ability to be in community? You are obviously sitting in a space. Your farmers market is a tremendous example. Your kids governor, all of these are tremendous examples of bringing people together across difference. And I'm wondering how this discussion of language is landing with you around what you're hearing and what you find resonates and brings people in versus things that you're saying, oh, that's not the way to engage.
I absolutely love the discussion of language. Long before I was at the Old State House, I was director of the Noah Webster House, and he, of course, wrote the first American dictionary. So when we were at meetings back then, somebody would say something, and there was a woman who would always say, "What do you mean by that? What's your definition?" And at first, it drove me nuts. But over time, I became that person because you really can't have a conversation if you don't know how people are using words. And so I love these Bridgie studies and our staff loves them. We have looked at them because we're working, when we're giving museum tours, we're giving tours to people from all over the country, all over the world. So we really want to be as opening and inviting as we can. So knowing what words are going to resonate with people in a positive or negative way is very important to us. But I think in general, it is part of that mix of things that we all need in order to build civic health. Because if we are isolated and bowling alone, and then we can't even talk to each other when we do meet up, that's a problem. So we have to be able to have ways of building common understanding. Doesn't have to be common agreement, but common understanding of what somebody is talking about when they use particular words or phrases. So I think it is absolutely one of the key factors in civic health is, good listening skills, but also being able to really use and understand and question words as we explore whatever we're exploring together, because we can't be together if we aren't working from the same place of understanding one another.
So true. I'll remind the audience, I'm going to turn to audience questions in just a few minutes. So feel free to use our Q&A to drop any other questions you might have for our panel. But I can't let this group get away without raising this issue that, there are so many ways in which technology has allowed us to be in conversation, in a form of connection more than ever before. Through social media, we are more connected in some ways than ever before, and that's side by side with this sense of increasing interpersonal disconnection. And so I want us to wrestle a little bit with, the conversation and engagement that happens at a farmer's market. We're calling civic part of civic engagement and civic health. But every day we see debate on conversation, debate, engagement over social media. I wonder how you think about that in this frame of civic engagement. Is that civic engagement? Is that a pathway to civic health? How do any, I'll open that to any of you all. How do you think about what happens on our social media platforms?
Yeah, so I've been around long enough that I remember when social media was going to be the savior of the world, and now social media is the worst thing ever. So we've kind of gone back and forth, and of course, one has to recognize that social media is just part of our environment now, and increasingly also AI is part of our environment in ways that we don't even understand or aren't aware of. So this is not something we can say yes or no to. It's simply something we have to kind of figure out and plan with and plan around and plan through. The kind of the biggest general overarching things that I think have been true, that have been most helpful, is recognizing, first of all, that tech and in-person conversation are both good for different reasons and they're best together. And basically, when you're at the farmers market or in many ways, there's all kinds of ways of using technology to support, facilitate, inform, enable face-to-face conversations. So you've got the intimacy and the convenience of a group meeting wherever and whenever they want, but they're also feeling part of a much larger conversation about some big issue in their community or their country. We did something called Text, Talk, and Act as part of the National Dialogue on Mental Health full 10, 12 years ago, which engaged thousands and thousands of people in something that was important to them personally and important to policy. And we did it using technology at the time, texting platforms, in addition to face-to-face sorts of things. So that combination is often what will work. And then also recognizing that another variation of this, hyper-local online platforms have tremendous potential. They're often doing tremendous harm, but all kinds of ways. And in fact, huge numbers of Americans are now connected with each other through online platforms that are reflecting the neighborhood where they live. So that has a lot of potential in the sense that you've got people with a common interest, things they can do together. They can easily talk to each other face to face, but you've got the kind of the convenience and all the information that can come with the tech. They're not meeting their potential in most places, but they can do so much. And I think that thinking about the way people live today, rather than simply saying it's all bad or would have been better 30 years ago, thinking about the way people live today, how can you kind of improve that and add different elements, whether the tech elements or in-person elements or something else, that arts and culture, whatever, that can kind of take it to a next level and deal with some of the problems that prop up.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Um, Shannon, did you want to add anything to that one?
I think Matt covered it. I mean, I think Sally used a word earlier, which comes to mind here, which is about being intentional about the use of tech.
Right.
So it's as Matt was saying, like not just taking it as like an, unabated good for social connection or bad. It's like, how do you incorporate in a way that helps build the skill or the muscle for people to be engaging civically across difference? And I think that's what's really missing is trying to figure out what is the connective tissue between some of the online engagement and then people having the skill to do that offline in the real world, which as a mom of three young kids, I can tell you is something that is really lacking. And so I think that's the gap that we need to address is just like using technology in a way that's very smart and intentional and in service of civic health. And that takes real intentionality to make that happen.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with you, Shannon, because we have a question in our chat. So certainly, community came through as the number one bridge word, and I think you said freedom was number two. But a question from Rebecca is, what words scored poorly here? What words should we be avoiding because they're particularly polarizing when engaging?
So, what I'm going to say is that, like, we don't believe that are any good words or bad words, right? There are words that send different signals to people. And so it's about choosing the right word for the right context and the right audience. So if you look at the How to Talk Bridgie 2.0 guide, it will show you what words are the bridgiest, and then it'll show you what words are not the bridgiest. Some of those that fall in the bottom category are things like law and order, diversity, social justice, racial equity, pluralism, and encouragingly authoritarian. But again, it doesn't mean that those are bad words or words to be avoided. It's just really an invitation, I think, to examine what signals are those words sending? Do I need to unpack what I mean by these things? Do I need to pair those words with other words if I'm trying to engage across lines of difference? So the guide gets into all of that. But the reason we lift up things like community and freedom is if you're speaking to people and you don't know kind of what their orientation is, and you're looking for that kind of like safe place because you're trying to communicate to a broad audience, there are words that you can kind of lean on, knowing that they do have this bridginess. And again, community, freedom, unity, service, and belonging are all at the top, which are all ideas that are directly linked to this concept of civic health.
Excellent. Thank
Karen, if I could jump in here also, I mean, part of the tricky thing here that we deal with, and I know you do with Shannon all over the place, is just this kind of tension people feel between trying to defend things against bad actors and then trying to project kind of a more positive vision. And it's a totally understandable thing. I mean, people will say, well, Matt, why are you talking about civic health when the house of democracy is burning down? And not only that, but it's not just burning down by accident. There are people setting it on fire. There are bad people doing bad stuff. And I totally understand that impulse. Part of the trick, though, with some of these words, like when people talk about defending democracy, they send a message about trying to turn back the clock or trying to hang on to the most basic parts of democracy. And I totally understand where that's coming from. But we have to recognize that in the US, support for democracy as an idea has been eroding for decades and decades. I mean, this is, we have a relatively old fashioned form of democracy that people haven't been gratified by for a long time. So if you're kind of painting yourself into a corner by saying, we just got to defend what we've got, you're giving what's in fact fairly unattractive, unappealing political message. It's just not a message which is compelling voters or citizens. So you certainly can be talking about defending. I mean, everybody wants the right to vote. People want human rights. That's going to be an important part of your message. You also need to be talking about the democracy that you want to build, or that we are building, and giving people examples of how they can do stuff together that are gratifying, that are affecting their daily lives. So it's that combination of kind of defense and offense, of kind of defending the best of what we've had from the past with adding things that we need for the future to fit how we live now, and just to fit the ideals that we have for how we want to live together.
I appreciate that. I'm going to try to weave a couple of questions in the time we have left, because we have one. We and many times start to think about, well, there's language, and if I use this, I'm engaging one group and alienating the other. But we have a question from Rob, who's pointing to something where something that needs to happen, and both sides of the aisle don't want to hear about it. He says, in my town, the term that cannot be used with Democrats or Republicans is charter revision. And what can be done to start a conversation on a topic where there's sort of something has to happen, but it's sort of universally rejected, is part of the question. And then after that, I'm going to lead us a little bit, because you started to have a conversation about the democracy that we want to build. And I do want to lead us into a bit about what the next 250th in this country could be. So let's start, though, with the universal opposition. And yet there's something that needs to happen. Like, how do we build community around that? How do we engage around that?
I have an idea that I can share, because I think this is where some of the deliberative democracy innovations are really important. There are things that are so polarizing politically that politicians avoid them, and yet people who live in those communities know that they need to be addressed and desperately want them to be addressed. So things like citizen assemblies can actually create the space and the momentum and the permission structure for people to engage on those issues, and then to tee up recommendations that then politicians have a hard time ignoring, because they can then say, well, like, our people actually want us to do this. And they came up with this set of recommendations. So that's the first thing that came to mind, is just sort of leaning on like poll lists and citizen assemblies and some of these other things to create the pressure and the space to talk about those things in a way that give politicians a bit of like deniability, right? Like plausible deniability that they brought it up. Instead, they're responding to their constituents. But that's just an
Hey,
initial.
that's a great example of the potential power of a citizen assembly or that type of thing. So, thank you. We're running a little short, but I cannot let us have this great conversation about civic engagement in this year of the 250th of the United States, with a founded with a Declaration of independence and set of goals, lofty goals that for 250 years we've we've been trying to make progress toward. And would love your reflections on how this moment of commemoration, of reckoning, can be used as a civic engagement tool and might lead us into greater expression of values that are actually inclusive and engaging. So what is this moment of the US 250th and the looking forward to the next 250? What does this offer? And I'll let each of you give a word on that as our final. So anything else you wanted to wrap in, you can do in this question. So Sally, what does this moment call for? What opportunity?
Well, I'm gonna give a simple answer. I think not that outstanding, but I think it calls for us to really look at the past and what happened in the past and what people were really doing, because they didn't know how it was going to turn out any more than we know how things are going to turn out. And you can look at people and find examples from the past of people who saw a problem and acted on it, had a belief and acted on it, had a feeling and thought about it before they acted on it. You can see all kinds of examples. So I would encourage people to really look at some of the actual words of people from Connecticut who lived at that time, what they were living through, the struggles they had, what they believed in, who was convincing them. We had a conference this last weekend that was incredible on 1776, and one person spoke about what were people hearing from the pews, what were the pastors saying. So paying attention to what people heard, saw, thought back then can shed some light on what we're experiencing today. So that might seem like an odd answer, but that's what I would say. It's a time to look back and see what people went through, how they thought about freedom, how they got their freedom, in whatever way or whatever kind of freedom they were seeking. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Shannon, let you jump in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be very similar to what Matt said. Like, I think it's a real invitation for people to share what they want for the future. And there are some really exciting things that are going on around the 250th that are inviting people into that conversation. So there's something called wish walls, where people are expressing their wishes for the future democracy that they want. There was something called quilting for the Constitution, where women from across the country were expressing what kind of constitutional reforms they wanted. Stand Together is sponsoring something called Be the People, which is really a storytelling initiative where people can express and story form what is the future that they want for this country. And so that's the opportunity that I see, like really people being able to articulate what they want in our democracy for the next 250 years.
Love that. Thank you. And Matt.
Yeah, I mean, what we're celebrating is the anniversary of an invention, and it wasn't a perfect invention. It was better for some people in very significant ways from what had come before, but it was an invention. And what we should be kind of recognizing there is that things periodically should get reinvented or renovated or improved in one way or another. There's been some commentary in the chat about town meeting. Town meeting in New England is a 1790s state-of-the-art invention. And it's good in many ways and not so good in others. And it's like anything from the 1790s, probably needs some updating or a renovation for the way we live now. So just kind of celebrating that spirit, and recognizing the inventions that we had before, whether it's 1776 or 1787, or whether it's the birth of the Civic League and that whole set of reforms 100 years ago. I mean, those are important things that solved a lot of the problems they were intended to solve. They have caused some of the problems we have today. So what do we want to do now in that same spirit of invention to figure out how to kind of retain what we want that we hold dear and make things better for the next generation.
Perfect words from the three of you to land this plane. As always, more wisdom than we could ever pack into 60 minutes. I certainly appreciate. Please, everyone, join me in thanking our panelists, Shannon, Matt, and Sally, for your wisdom, your leadership, for what you are doing every day to strengthen civic life across this country and certainly here at home. Today was our beginning conversation, the beginning of a much larger exploration. In future briefings, we will continue to bring forth voices. We will bring local voices and highlight local initiatives. If you want to support this work at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, please engage with our Civic Engagement Fund, which will allow us to continue to invest in meaningful ways in civic health, in the civic health of the Greater New Haven region. This is fundamental to our well-being. The foundation is committed to supporting the trust, relationships, and shared purpose that allows communities to thrive. Thank you so much for being with us. There will be an evaluation dropped. We encourage you to do that so that we know more of what you'd like to hear. We will send out more information and answer some of the questions that we didn't get to, and hope to see many of you at our upcoming annual meeting on Tuesday, May 12th. Have a great afternoon, and thank you all.
Thank you.